It says here that you managed some short tracks in your time. Tuscan Raceway Park. So what was did somebody call you and say, hey, man?
No, that was all me wanting to operate something. All me knowing I'm not going to operate the Talladega Speedway.
Right.
So it was a great experience. I moved to Tucson. People thought I was crazy, but I had 4 employees. That includes me, by the way. So we had 3. And it was a great experience. A dirt track. You had to do everything. You had to be the race official, the promoter.
And you did?
I did. I did. We were financially made some money with it. At that point, that was going to be where ISC at the time was going to own perhaps a lot of those short tracks. We never worked out for us to do that. But so we ended up.
Well, that would be cool today. Like if we were sitting here, I'm still heavily involved in short track scene, and man, that would be incredible if you guys owned like half a dozen short tracks in this area. Had that worked out to where it worked
out, but it didn't work out for us. But it was a great experience for me.
Yeah. Is that the only track you had hands-on experience with?
Yeah, I pretty quickly from there went to the touring divisions and ran those. Got some organization to those touring divisions at the time. Northwest Tour at the time, Southwest Tour, the modifieds, all that stuff. Kind of got some organization to that.
On the West Coast. So you spent
and the East Coast
at
the time.
All right, because I know later you went to the LA office and So you had working in Tucson and all that. You had some experience. You had because people have to remember, like in the '80s and the '70s. Yeah, we had some races on the West Coast, but we weren't really that massive,
right?
West of the Mississippi. But I think that were you seeing like, hey man, like you say, you got to figure out where you can bring something to the table that's not there. Were you seeing this opportunity for growth? You needed to take NASCAR to introduce it to LA. Was that part of your initiative?
Well, yes. Anything we could do to what we found is when we got out of the Southeast, we did real well. Whether it was going to Phoenix or whether it was going to Fontana or wherever it was, and we didn't just do well for live events, but when our events got distributed on Fox or NBC or whatever it was at the time, in those markets we were doing pretty well, and so we knew we had some pent up demand for NASCAR, and we also knew that from my time out there that the touring divisions were always strong. The Winston West, Northwest Tour, Southwest Tour, those touring divisions up and down California, Oregon. I lived in Portland, Oregon for a little while, worked at the Portland Speedway. And so I knew that the grassroots fan base was always there. And then we were getting drivers from California, Jeff Gordon and others. So we started to get that more national feel, and I wanted to take advantage of that for the sport.
Yeah.
Well, what else are you picking up other than realizing there's an appetite from coast to coast for racing? What other practical things are you picking up when it terms of managing racetracks, facilities that you would then, in looking back, realize that they were kind of beneficial for your management and your leadership styles?
Well, remember, mostly I was not on the racetrack side. My sister, we're all carving out some space, and she did a really good job, and at ISC at the time, and of course other track drivers. So what I was seeing was that if we could present our product, to more people at further distances, we could do well. We could do well. And if we presented that, and if we took some ideas from the other leagues that were that I've gotten criticized for, as you guys know, through the years, but that's okay. But if we took some of the ideas of how to package television, how to package licensing, merchandising, how to go to market with corporate America in a smarter way, can we do some of those things? And we did. We did a lot of those things, and a lot of them worked. Can we create a championship style format? A lot of discussion about that at the time, as you guys know. A lot of people said that can't be done, shouldn't be done. I think we all kind of look at it now and go, glad we have that, because, man, that's exciting. And everything we were doing was to create a bigger pie for everyone, a bigger audience, and then eventually and how do you do that? You don't just do it by marketing gimmicks or repackaging things. You do it because the product itself is on display. This close, tight racing that we don't always get right, but we're trying, right? And this safe, competitive racing. And if you go through the arc of it, you'll see periods in our history where we're out of balance in some things. I'm one of my least famous moments is, or maybe it is famous, with the new car, with the original new car that we had coming out of with safety that the drivers really didn't like.
Yeah, COT.
You're sitting at a table with one of them.
I know, and I understand that now. I mean, that was we could have done a better job of in a lot of things, but that's an example of trying to move things in a direction, and you don't always get all that, just perfect.
Yeah. So you moved to run NASCAR's LA office in the 90s, in 1990, or in the 90s.
Late 90s, yeah.
So that I was reading through that, and I remember going to racetracks, and all of a sudden, there was this sort of flood of, race paint schemes with movies on them. A lot of promotions around movies, and you were part of spearheading that initiative. Were you not?
I was, and think we could still do more of that.
Yeah.
Truthfully,
That
kind
made
of gotten
us
away from it.
That made us feel important. For lack of a better way to describe it, when we had like these major films that are coming out, Batman Forever and all these things on the hood of the race cars, multiple cars at some tracks, you'd have multiple movies on the racetrack, on the race car paint scheme. It made the sport feel bigger, made the sport feel relevant to mainstream America. Right.
Yeah.
And so, like you say, I mean, that was that, and I didn't have any idea. I didn't have any clue that you were part of sort of that brain.
Well, it was me. One of the things in a family business, and you know this very well, is you have this incredible access to people, and I always tell people in family businesses, you got to use that. You got to use that because I could get certain things done. Ben Kennedy can get certain things done that no one else is in the organization who may be much smarter, have better ideas, but they can't get some of those ideas through. But we can. You got to be use those carefully, but you got to use that moment, and that's what I try to do within the family business. So that would be an example of that, where a little controversial. Really, do we want to be married with Hollywood and all of what that could mean? And the answer is yes, we do. We got to hire. You got to make an investment because that's not going to just fall into our lap.
Yeah.
We're going to have to put an office out there. We're going to have to hire really good people. We're going to have to pay them a lot of money, and we're going to present the opportunity. And there goes Talladega Nights, which was fun and opened us up and made a little fun at us. We took a little risk there. So you got to take some creative risk. But in the end of the day, you're back to this. What you're trying to do is, are we growing the enterprise value or in a responsible, smart way for everyone?
Yeah.
Knowing there are going to be people along the way that go, that's too far, that's too much. I'd rather get that criticism than then you're making the sport smaller, or you're not looking at it big enough, or I'd rather take that criticism.
Was that our industry's biggest fault, is that we weren't giving ourselves enough credit back then? Like, we just, whatever the stigma was in NASCAR before we're trying to go to Hollywood or trying to go expand, were we our own worst enemies at that point in terms of expansion? Or maybe the better way of saying it was we were satisfied with where the industry was, and you're like, no, we could be bigger. We just have to take a few more risks, right? And we have to go knock on some doors in Hollywood. We got to go plan an office in New York.
Yeah, I think it's a continual balance that every sport has. Baseball, they have it all the time. What is balancing your past, your core fan, your core existence, versus the fan of the future, and how do you marry those two? It's tough, and some do it better than others, and keep expanding and keeping growing. I used to have one simple thought: hey, I want everybody in the country to be a NASCAR fan. So that means I got to market to certain people that are in areas that they may not take a look at us a little differently. That's how a lot of our diversity programs originally happened. They weren't because we had a lot of social pressure on us. We just thought that was an untapped market. We weren't getting in the crews and the teams in the executive offices. We weren't getting as much as we would have liked in terms of the talent that a more diverse group of people might bring to us. So let's go reach out to them. Let's go reach out to historically black colleges. Let's tell them that not only welcome here, we need them. We need them. And we need them to be in the stands. We need them to be on the pit crew. We need them to be in the front office. We need them to be running racetracks. We need the Hispanic. We've done a lot, and NASCAR continues to do that. Mm-hmm. So it's not. There's a selfish motivation to doing all this stuff and growing the pie for everyone.
Is it fair to say, though, that in that expansion effort, some fans felt alienated, or that there was that the expansion came at the expense of some of the roots? Is it fair to say that?
It is. You can make that argument all day long, and then if you make that argument all day long, you also won't go anywhere. You'll just stay right there. But it is true that North Wilkesboro, and congratulations on all that, as an example of events that got moved to different places at the time, and we tried to do less of that than most of the other auto racing leagues, for sure. We wanted historically important events to be on the schedule. We didn't want promoters looking over their shoulder at their dates disappearing, where they wouldn't invest in the facilities and the promotion. So we tried to balance that, but if you're trying to, climb the mountain and grow, you're going to have some of that.
Speaking of that instance, I mean, there was, having spent some time with Marcus and talked to him about, we've asked him about that, that whole transaction of North Wilkesboro going away, and I think we've kind of changed his opinion about the possibilities for the property and the racetrack, and now it's going to be an all-star event. But you were around and heavily involved in the sport when when they did go to Texas, and they were trying to, they did buy, the dates away from Wilkesboro, and from, we heard Marcus's opinion about how they wanted to make that happen. How did NASCAR feel about what control they had over that situation? And racing going away from Wilkesboro and going to new markets. I know that the markets were exciting, but you also were leaving a historical place that you say, that you'd like to remain in some of those places that have that historical value.
Well, look, NASCAR has a lot of control over the sport. Mm-hmm. It does not have absolute control, and nor should it. And so there are lots of things that NASCAR will try to influence, will hope happens, but for different reasons it doesn't. And that's a good example where that was bought by Bob Bear at the time. and others, and there was litigation that was involved, and all kinds of things that we would have preferred not to see. But
you'd have preferred that.
We would have preferred not. Well, we would have certainly preferred to have a smoother transition. However it would have been sorted out. But again, we didn't. That we're not in control of all of that, and some of that stuff it needs to just kind of work itself out.
When you're watching NASCAR today, so I always have this conversation come up when there's a lot of collaboration. We're going to talk about the RTA, but there's the RTA now where the teams have sort of formed an alliance. The drivers are now all trying to be a little bit more of a one single voice and have a seat at the table. Obviously, we know that the networks have gained a ton of influence over the last couple of decades. They spend the most money in the sport, which is rightfully for them to have that influence. But even when the networks were heavily influenced and your dad was at the helm, I really, really admired the way he ran the sport. And there were moments when he literally would come to the ground floor in front of everyone and say, "We're doing it this way."
Yeah.
And that's the end of the conversation. And I feel like, and I wonder sometimes if I'm just an old timer or, a boomer that, doesn't see really the good in where we are today. But sometimes I miss that. Sometimes I miss there being a one guy at the top that was going to say, "All right, yeah, this is the end of the conversation. This is the decision we're making today, and we're moving forward." And nobody had a word to say otherwise.
Or they can leave. He didn't mind that. He's like, "You can leave."
You've been that so well.
Yeah.
Having grew up with him. How much of that is really necessary today? Could that, how do you feel about how it's sort of changed to where we really are now more, it's more of a committee, it's more of a bigger conversation around things. Things take a lot longer to sort of get worked out and resolved. The thing moves much slower. And so I kind of miss it being, one guy going, all right, here's a set of rules you got today, play by them.
Well, first of all, at 48, you're not an old timer. So let's start with that.
There you go.
A lot of that was an era where you could have a John Wayne, my dad, and he could pull that off, and the sport benefited from that. I don't know that, if you go back in any sports history, you'll find people like that in the sport that took them from one place to another, usually up. Mm-hmm. In today's system, that person really couldn't exist, even if they were, even if you wanted them to.
Right.
There's just too many stakeholders that have a very loud and voice. You just can't kind of believe me. When I was coming through, I would have loved to have had that kind of a platform to run around but that just wasn't who I was anyway. But even if it was, we were getting to see. Once you bring in people that they're vested in there with you, and their livelihoods are at stake, and these teams get built out to super teams and these sprawling complexes and network television spending billions of dollars, then you can't just say, "Well, the wind blew today, and I'm going this way."
Yeah.
You just can't quite do that. You have to have a more of a consensus. Doesn't mean that you can't, put your foot down, and we do. The NASCAR does, and we'll make tough decisions. But there's going to be more pushing and shoving now.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is.
If you like that conversation with Brian France, you can listen to the whole podcast because it's all available on every podcast platform.